Hey, hey. Really the only thing that gon' be normal is distribution. Normal folks gon' infuse some. Optimize your lineups and you feed the rest, you mute them. Turning it up, these numbers are loud. Peeping this game from a nimbus is wild. Making it rain. While I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Hey, hey. Really the only thing that gon' be normal is distribution. Normal folks gon' infuse some. Optimize your lineups and your
This is quarterback Will Levis, and you're listening to the Best Bell Fantasy Podcast.
Hey, hey. Really the only thing that gon' be normal is distribution. Normal folks gon' infuse some. Optimize your lineups and you feed the rest, you mute them. Turning it up, these numbers are loud. Peeping this game from a nimbus is wild. Making it rain. While I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world.
And welcome in to the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast and live stream. My name is Bradley Stalder. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. Also, if you like the content for tonight, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Tonight, I'm going to be doing a live mock draft using the PFF, Pro Football Focus Mock Draft Simulator. But what's going to make this a little bit different is I'm not worried as much about landing spot. I'm not going to focus on, do the Bears trade their first pick, or do they draft a quarterback first, or is Will Levis going to be the number 4th pick overall going to the Colts, right? I'm not concerned as much about the landing spot in this type of analysis. I am going to more focus on what are some players that are going to be earning certain draft capital in this draft. So that's going to be one of the most important parts of analyzing these rookies, is not only the location of where they're going to be drafted, like the team who drafts them, but where are they going to go in the draft? Are there certain players who are going to be first round picks? Are there day 2 players that are surprises? Or are there players that sneak into the day 2 that we didn't think were going to be there? Or are there some snubs? And we can look at that for sure as we go through. I'll be pausing and talking about, which teams could draft, and we can hypothesize and think, what kind of landing spot is that? But I'm more going to focus on any surprises of draft capital. And this is the first one that I'm going to be doing. My hope is to do many Monday mock drafts moving forward, so that way we can start to see a progression of where are these players going to be going as we get more information from the combine. Obviously, we got some information from the Senior Bowl. Are there any players that are significantly going to be impacting you for fantasy? And as a result, I'm only going to focus on the first 4 rounds of the NFL mock draft. Typically, day 1 players hit pretty heavily. Day 2 players hit here and there. And then we've been seeing some early day 3 players hit more often, at least over the last couple of years. They've been earning some draft capital, certainly more risky as well once we get into day 3. Day 3 is not a death sentence for fantasy, but I'm not looking at round 5 and beyond for our fantasy purposes tonight. So without further ado, we'll pull up PFF's mock draft simulator. You can go to pff.com/draft/NFL-mock-draft-simulator, or you can go to this little search bar in the top and just type in mock draft simulator. Okay. And you can choose whichever team or teams you want to draft as. You can draft as multiple teams. You can draft as all of the teams. You can mock draft every single pick yourself if you wanted to. You can select all the teams, or you can toggle that back off and just select one team. Tonight, I will be drafting as the Houston Texans. I also am not going to be trading at all. I want to see, for these purposes and for expedition, keeping this a pretty quick mock draft, just where our players going to be going. So I don't want trades to really get in the way of that or for us to cloud our judgment. You can change the settings as well. You can ask this mock draft to care more or less about positional value. You can ask for the mock draft to focus on whether team needs are addressed in the draft. So PFF has listed, and you'll see this here in a second once we start the draft, that each team has a top 3 at least priority in what positions those teams need in the draft. And then, of course, the third is randomness. Like, randomly, are we going to get a player a little bit higher or a little bit lower? That's just, sometimes we get some randomness in the draft, and maybe we'll do a few mock drafts later on this offseason where I move the randomness to more and we just turn on the spice. But for right now, we're going to just use the default settings. This is a baseline mock draft. It is February 6th. We haven't had the combine yet. Of course, the draft is at the end of April. We are months away, but some of you are doing way too early or never too early 2023 drafts already. And you want to know, where should I draft these rookies? And PFF will give you a good idea of the range in which these players are going to be going. And that will also inform you as to where should you take them in your 2023 drafts, right? You don't want to be taking rookies too early, but you also don't want to be taking them too late or missing out on value, right, when they could have been a positive influence on your team. All right, without further ado, I've selected it. It's going to be 4 rounds. I'm going to draft as the Houston Texans. The speed is going to be slow so I can catch and pause and make any comments that I want throughout this live mock draft that I'll be doing here in just a moment. So it's going to be 4 rounds. Speed is slow. We're using default settings, and we're going to enter the draft as the Houston Texans. Okay, so what you'll see here is some trade proposals. If you really want to force some trades throughout it and get spicy with what you want to mess around with in this mock draft simulator, you can force trades and see what happens. So, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And as has been said since the last game of the season, Chicago Bears are on the clock. So without further ado, let's start this mock draft. The Chicago Bears are on the clock, and they select Jalen Carter. And sure, Jalen Carter, interior defensive lineman out of Georgia. The Bears need everything. As you can tell, they have literally 6 different needs listed. I only see, the rest of the way as I scroll through, like 4 or 5 is the max. The Buccaneers look like they need 5 after the Tom Brady retirement. But the Bears need everything, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do trade back, but I'm not going to project that. Instead, the Houston Texans are going to select Bryce Young out of Alabama. Bryce Young is my number 1 quarterback in this draft class by far. I think he's head and shoulders above everyone else. And that's going to be a major pickup for the Houston Texans. So we're going to pause it actually right here, because Bryce Young goes off, and then we see Will Levis, friend of the podcast, Will Levis, go off at number 4 for the Indianapolis Colts. And Will Levis in 2022, we're out of Kentucky. I wanted to see, okay, minimum dropbacks, like 300. Where does Will Levis land in PFF grade? Well, Will Levis is 72nd among all quarterbacks out of 87. 72nd out of 87 PFF graded passing quarterbacks for 2022. So I think that we're going to see some Will Levis being drafted highly, but I have some concerns about how he's going to be joining the Colts or any of these other teams near the top. I would prefer if Will Levis, people waited on Levis. They waited around. They let him develop. He's got some tools, certainly, to be a successful quarterback in the NFL, but immediately jumping in and being the starting quarterback, I have a little hesitance right now based on what we saw last year out of Kentucky. Okay, let's resume this and see what other fantasy implications there are. We see it's Bryce Young and then Will Levis going at 4. All right, and the Las Vegas Raiders draft. So far, we haven't had many other fantasy implications coming out of this mock draft. And right now, CJ Stroud has fallen to 12th. That's pretty crazy. That's the latest I've seen him in a lot of these drafts. But based on what the Texans need, they need some defensive linemen. They need a center. They need a lot of help. Tyree Wilson, if he's there as an edge, I wouldn't hate that for them. Just an impact player out of Texas Tech. Still a lot of defense so far off the board. We haven't seen a lot of other players, fantasy relevant, go off the board. Holy buckets. We just saw Josh Downs. This is the earliest I've seen Josh Downs in one of these mock drafts. Josh Downs goes to Pittsburgh, pick 17 overall. Wow. That is wild to me. I love it, though. An early declare. There's a lot of love for Josh Downs. And I think that this is going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Josh Downs, you need to be drafting him with expected first-round draft capital moving forward. It shouldn't be surprising if he ends up in the first round in any one of the drafts. So Josh Downs, the first wide receiver off the board in this mock draft. So we'll be monitoring this situation moving forward. This is the earliest I've seen Josh Downs, and I've done dozens of these mock drafts, but I wanted to do one for y'all tonight. And Josh Downs going at 17 seems a little early, but I don't hate it because I have a lot of Josh Downs so far in the drafts that I've done on FFPC and the FFWC. All right, we're resuming the draft. We'll see who the Detroit Lions pick. Defensive player, edge player, Lucas Van Ness. Bijan Robinson goes off at 19. So no, he does not make it to the Dallas Cowboys. He does not make it to the Buffalo Bills. I had seen in a previous mock draft that I did a couple minutes ago that Bijan went to the Buffalo, and seeing him go to the Buccaneers is certainly an eyebrow raise, but I'm not going to focus on that landing spot. It's that Bijan Robinson doesn't even make it outside the top 20 of picks. That's what you need to know, is that he's going to be, of course, the number one running back drafted in this class, but he's going higher than where Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker went last year. So that's certainly something that we need to be keeping an eye on, is how high is Bijan Robinson going to go? And I don't hate that he's going to be a top 20 pick in 2023 drafts. All right. We'll keep going. Seattle's on the clock. Ojulari goes off the board. That's the earliest I've seen Ojulari so far. Yeah. Lots of defensive players here in the first round. This is surprising to me. Usually you see a lot more going off the board here. I hope I'm not going to have to restart this mock draft because it's throwing me for a loop. Jackson Smith and Jigba goes off for the Bengals at pick 28. Smith and Jigba getting first-round draft capital is going to be nice after missing almost all of the 2022 season due to the hamstring injury. And a landing spot with the Bengals would most likely facilitate a T. Higgins trade. But once again, I'm not focused on the specific landing spot, but that Jackson Smith and Jigba gets first-round draft capital will mean a lot for fantasy and for wherever he lands in the back half of that first round. Like if he goes to Buffalo, if he goes to Dallas, if he goes to New Orleans, the Bengals, I think those are all going to be major landing spots. Same thing with the Giants. Any of these teams that are going to draft Jackson Smith and Jigba, are going to be good for fantasy value. So yes, I like that. that is where he is going, especially in this mock draft. Okay. The New Orleans Saints are on the board, and they draft a tackle. Wow. Jahmyr Gibbs makes it into the first round, goes to the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think Jahmyr Gibbs goes, that early. I've seen him more in the 40s or 50s. But 30th overall, you would think that Andy Reid would, make a better decision after the Clyde Edwards-Helaire debacle. But nevertheless, Jahmyr Gibbs has a high-end round 2, low-end round 1 pick. Probably gets him bumped up in the dynasty streets. Like, if he gets first round draft capital, you have to be more interested in Jahmyr Gibbs being closer to Bijan Robinson, and making him closer in that tier 2 than being closer to the tier 3. Because I think it's Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then there's more debate about who's going to be afterwards. So let's keep it going. The Jahmyr Gibbs pick at the end of the first round is certainly eyebrow raising. Let's keep going. The Eagles are on the clock, and they go Quentin Johnson back into the first round. Okay. So holy buckets, CJ Stroud is still on the board. Anthony Richardson is still on the board. This is wild stuff. But Quentin Johnson at the back end of the first round, he'll get first round draft capital. Michael Mayer, this is the latest I've seen him in any one of the mock drafts, going as the first pick in the second round to Pittsburgh. Right. As I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, I'm not fixated on the specific team that they're landing on, that these players are landing on, but I am focused on maybe talking about a little bit where in the draft itself, what type of draft capital are these players going to get? And Quentin Johnson getting first round draft capital is going to mean a lot. I've seen him actually closer to the 12th to 16th pick overall. This is the latest really I've seen Quentin Johnson. And Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, absolute stud, go Irish. This is the latest I've seen him as well. So we will see. Look, I'm taking either Zay Flowers or Jordan Addison at this spot. If I'm the Houston Texans, I want to pair Bryce Young, who I drafted in the first round, with a wide receiver. And we're going to go with Jordan Addison, much more polished wide receiver. And we will see Anthony Richardson go off at the beginning of the second round. Parker Washington. Let's take a moment and actually talk about Parker Washington, because this is a player not being drafted a lot or very early in these 2023 way too early drafts, but he, in this mock draft, gets early second round draft capital. And early second round top. I mean, Christian Watson was picked 34 last year in the NFL draft. So Parker Washington going at 35 in this mock draft should be eyebrow raising for you, that you need to bump him up just because of this projected draft capital. Like, if we're looking at Washington, Parker Washington, I think he was in the 70s or so of PFF receiving grade. Based on what I'm seeing, maybe he didn't get enough targets. Parker Washington, yeah, he was 66th in PFF grade, 66 targets, nearly a 70% catch rate, 76.7 PFF receiving grade, and a few other things. 6.3 yards after catch per reception. Okay, that was fine. But the yards per route run for Parker Washington was 2.18. That was 98th. So I think that PFF has Parker Washington higher than what some of the data or stats indicate, but he's a player. If he gets that early day 2 draft capital, you can't be like ignoring that for your fantasy, especially given how late he was going. I think I was getting him in like round 17, 18, 19. And if there's a round 2 wide receiver, just take your shots on those types of players. Okay. But let's keep it going. Anthony Richardson, a back end first round pick. I am surprised it's where some of these positional players these skilled position players are going in this mock draft. But nevertheless, we're going to resume, and Seattle is on the clock. Zay Flowers goes off. I like Zay Flowers as a top 40 pick. I've seen him go as high as 16th in some of the mock drafts. This is actually, I think, the lowest I've seen on Zay Flowers. Flowers looks really dynamic on film. Okay, we see a lot more linebackers, defensive linemen go off the board. DeJuan Jones, 40th overall, tackle out of Ohio State. Tanner McGee, 45th. He's a pretty much consensus second round quarterback that I've seen. I've seen him early third in some of the mocks, very late first in some of the mocks, but Tanner McGee going in the middle of the second round in super flex. I mean, it's going to depend on where he lands, honestly. We've seen like the Kyle Trasks of the world and the Kellen Monds of the world get drafted in the second and third round and just simply not pan out, right? So Tanner McGee, whenever you don't get a quarterback in the first round, it's a really risky proposition. You might as well just take your shots in second and third round wide receivers and running backs at that point for possible fantasy goodness. Okay, so let's keep going though. Tanner McGee, not a first round quarterback, but lands probably in the second round. Okay, Keandre Coburn from Texas, Garrett Williams out of Syracuse, Darnell Washington, tight end out of Georgia. Yeah, let's look at Darnell Washington, do a little bit of talk about Washington. Okay, let's go to receiving grade. And Darnell Washington was 17th among tight ends with a 77.1 receiving grade for PFF, but a 16.1 yards per reception. That was the highest among all tight ends with at least 39 targets. So a more downfield threat for a middle of the second round pick. We'll see how his athletic measurables come out, but Darnell Washington, Kincaid, right? Those are going to be tight ends that you're keeping your eye on as maybe late round dart throws, but still, like first and second round tight ends typically don't hit very much, and you can't be interested significantly in their fantasy value. The only one that I'm majorly in on is Michael Mayer, but Kincaid also could come through for you as well. Kincaid, actually a higher receiving PFF grade than Mayer, a higher reception percentage, and a higher yards per reception than Michael Mayer. So I think that Kincaid is actually, in the same similar tier as Michael Mayer here. But let's keep going. Darnell Washington, middle of the second round. Let's keep going. Okay. Tampa Bay Buccaneers take Kendre Miller out of TCU. So Miller gets second round draft capital. That will be a major play for anybody drafting. If you can get second round draft capital for a running back, boom. A.T. Perry, wide receiver out of Wake Forest, gets second round draft capital. Okay. Yeah, there are some surprises in this mock draft that I've not been seeing before. But A.T. Perry is going to be a player that we can take a look at. Keaton Mitchell, a late second round pick out of East Carolina. Rashee Rice, who by many respects did not impress a lot at the Senior Bowl, goes at the back end of the second round. And now we're up yet again. I was talking up Kincaid, and I think that the Texans could use, a tight end. They drafted Brevin Jordan a couple years ago, and he really hasn't panned out. And Jordan Akins was a pretty nice pick. So there's really a lot of offensive firepower happening for the Houston Texans, getting Addison, Young, and Kincaid. But looking earlier in the draft, Kincaid goes off, and then Tyjae Spears. We talked about Rashee Rice not performing very well at the Senior Bowl. Tyjae Spears had some major highlights at the Senior Bowl out of Tulane, and if he gets early round 3 draft capital, that's going to be really, really nice. So keep that in mind for when you're drafting, is how will that early third round draft capital impact your view of Tyjae Spears? If he falls to round 4 or day 3, right, then you have to put him into that risky bucket of, is he going to be Isaiah Spiller or is he going to be Tyler Algier? Whereas if he gets day 3 or round 3 draft capital, Tyjae Spears hopefully is not your Tyrion Davis Price. Okay. Okay. Jose asks a question here before we move on. Is there data that shows a rookie wide receiver in round 1 or round 2? Do they produce enough fantasy points to be draftable? If so, when is the cutoff point? Good question, Jose. And I have a little bit of data to share with you about this exact question. It's almost as though I planted you in here because I wanted to talk about the rookie wide receivers and where is that threshold happening. So when should you draft these first and second round wide receivers? Draft capital matters a lot. And for first round wide receivers, or at least like those picked in the first 34 picks in the draft, looking at what happened last year, right? We saw Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, right? Go off. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, all get first round draft capital. Christian Watson was the second pick in the second round. So you don't hate that. And so I included him in this sample size because it's important to say, okay, these really early round 2 wide receivers, how did they impact? And I have the data from last year. I haven't gone deeper than that. That's for later on in the offseason. But just for last year, 6% of the time, they were a top 5 wide receiver, like collectively among all of their games. 6% of the time, that grouping of 7 wide receivers was a top 5 wide receiver 6% of the time. What does that mean? Well, that was the same as DeAndre Hopkins last year, the same rate. Higher than Brandon Ayuk, higher than Keenan Allen, higher than Gabe Davis, higher than DJ Moore. Okay. So yes, they were pretty impactful with major upside. Then also, if you look at where did they land, like in top 10 weeks, it was the same rate as Garrett Wilson. Okay. And same rate, a higher rate than CD Lamb for top 10 wide receiver weeks. Devonta Smith, higher than Devonta Smith, higher than Christian Kirk, higher than Mike Evans, higher than Tyler Lockett last year. In rate at which those players collectively are grouped hit top 10 weeks. And then looking even at like, what was the chance that they were flex plays? They got 12.5 PPR fantasy points. Well, they were 29th among all wide receivers. If that grouping was their own wide receiver at 33.3% of the time, those wide receivers got at least 12.5 fantasy points. What does this all mean? These first and early second round draft capital wide receivers are extremely undervalued. Anytime you can get these wide receivers, the Josh Downs of the world, like let's scroll back. Who ends up in early round 2 and in round 1? Okay, Zay Flowers, for instance, Parker Washington, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Okay, and Josh Downs. Those are going to be the major targets for you. Obviously, we're going to be monitoring where do they actually land in the draft. But of the picks that go in the top 37 in this draft, almost all of them are being picked outside of the top 35 in the 2023 real life, like 2023 never too early drafts. I think the earliest I saw Jackson Smith and Jigba was go 34th, wide receiver 34. What are we afraid of? Right? Like we knew if we take Jameson Williams out of the picture, out of the equation, because we knew Jameson Williams' ACL injury was going to be one that was a high risk proposition. And let's say that you waited on Treylon Burks, right? Because there was talk in the offseason about, Treylon Burks is out of shape and he's really not playing well for Tennessee. It's not the Jamar Chase of, he's had the occasional drop. No, like Treylon Burks was really out of shape. If you were buying into those and understanding those narratives in the offseason, you remove those from the sample. The wide receivers that got first round draft capital really hit. They majorly hit for you for best ball. Now, the difficulty is in redraft, you need those types of players to be hitting at the beginning of the season. So that's why you want to take like some of the veterans like DeAndre Hopkins, pair them with these young players. But you can be more aggressive. And I encourage you, be more aggressive with these wide receivers that get very early second round draft capital and first round draft capital, because they will hit, they will give you upside, right? Are you going to be taking these players at like wide receiver 12 or wide receiver 14? No, you're not going to. And the market will never have you there because there's always concern about, oh, is this player going to hit or not? Like, here's the thing. Brandon Cooks was drafted as wide receiver 25. Deontay Johnson was a top 20 pick last year. Russell Gage was in the top 30 of picks. All of those guys busted this past year. Like, you're going to get busts. You're going to get players who bust. But what we like to see from these early second round wide receivers with draft capital and first round wide receivers with draft capital is that collectively as a group, they will hit some massive upside games. Even Jahan Dotson. There was a lot of hatred for Jahan Dotson. He was going as wide receiver 62 in July, and he was a top 20 draft pick. Jahan Dotson, 42.4% of the time of the games that he played, he scored at least 12.5 fantasy points. That was 22nd best. Now, he didn't have any top 5 or top 10 weeks, but he offered, as I said, 40% of the time that he was in your lineup, he was making a difference for you in the best ball streets. And he was just dealing with injuries. Like, injuries happen to any of the players. So, yes, if these players, they're not just draftable, they have some nice ceiling. So what kind of player are we getting? We're getting a mid-pack wide receiver 3 with upside collectively from this group of players. Now, each player is going to have his own profile, and we'll get more understanding about these players from the combine based on their measurables, the official heights and weights and BMI and their 40 times and their strength and conditioning drills and their burst scores and their cone drills, everything like that. We'll also get some of the dog ratings. I'll be sure to try to get Cody Carpentier back on. That was a great interview last year that I had with him coming into the season and into the draft season. He's out of player profiler, but what I'm saying is that, yes, we should be aggressive about drafting these first round wide receivers, right? And whichever ones come to us at a nice value, anytime outside of the top 36 of wide receivers in a particular too early draft, you should be comfortable taking some wide receivers that have projected first round and early second round draft capital. Okay. But there we go, Jose. Hopefully I answered your question. We're going to have more research for you in longevity and longitudinally as we go through the offseason. But ultimately, you should be into these wide receivers that get really nice draft capital. All right. Without further ado, we're going to keep going. And the Houston Texans, they need some help. So, yeah, we need a center here. That's going to be a draft pick right here at 52. That's going to be a nice pick. So, yeah, out of the Cleveland trade, some edge players go off. Rashawn Johnson gets round 3 draft cap, day 2 draft capital. Trey Palmer out of Nebraska, okay, gets round 3 or day 2 draft capital. And Palmer was 17th among all wide receivers in PFF grade. And in fact, that was 20%. So that was like minimum 30 targets. But Trey Palmer was 11th among wide receivers with at least 80 targets. Okay, so this is a possible round 3 target for you. Another round 3 target in the NFL draft Jalen Hyatt, massive upside. There's been a lot of people comping him to Jameson Williams, but a little less refined Jameson Williams. He is the type of, and Will Fuller, he's the type of like best ball play that I could see you taking him like how you should have been taking a couple shares of Tyquan Thornton this past year. Like Tyquan Thornton had a couple spike weeks that just came out of nowhere, and you'll never be comfortable taking like Tyquan Thornton as a flex play in your redraft leagues, but best ball is the perfect time to do so. And Tyquan Thornton, I mean, he had a higher flex rate than Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Jarvis Landry last year, higher than Alec Pierce, right? Higher than Michael Gallup, higher than Deontay Johnson or Chase Claypool. So Tyquan Thornton, 0.4% of the time, was a top 10 wide receiver. And you're like, well, what is that? Well, that's the same like rate of upside as like Curtis Samuel. Okay. Drake London was 1.8% of the time. Okay. Tyquan Thornton had a higher top 10 rate than Brandon Cooks. So if you're taking like last second stabs, like last round stabs, you want to take them on just game breaking speed type of players, like the Tyquan Thorntons of the world, like the Jalen Hyatts of the world. If you want to sprinkle in a Will Fuller because you believe he's going to come back on it, I'm not convinced he will. But if you want to do that, that's totally fine. Okay, Jose says, thank you. I'll be drafting some rookies in the mix when I'm drafting in the best ball, maybe up to 3 rookies if I draft 8 or 9 wide receivers in 20 round. All depends on the draft goes. Yeah. And I would lean into that draft capital, right? You're going to have some hits. You're going to have some misses. But here's the thing. You know what a lot of these veteran wide receivers are. And you know that they're probably trash, right? Like, why would you take the chance on? Let me just find some examples here. Who's a classic example of this? Like, okay, people, I know y'all love Hunter Renfrow, but like, would you take Hunter Renfrow at wide receiver 50, or would you take a back end round 1, early round 2 rookie wide receiver? Like, we know what Hunter Renfrow is. He's a slot receiver on a team that we don't know who the quarterback is. And there's Darren Waller and Devontae Adams, and the Raiders are probably in the market for getting another wide receiver. Mac Hollins had some nice spike weeks. Like, we know what Hunter Renfrow is. Why don't we take a chance on a player that has first round or second round wide receiver draft capital? Or like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. We know what Marquez Valdes-Scantling is. Okay. Or like Robbie Anderson, right? Yes, he's 30 years old but you know what type of player he is. You don't know what Josh Downs is going to bring to you, except for a really strong indicator that he's going to get early draft capital. He was an early declare. He played well. He had one of the highest, I think he had the 5th highest PFF receiving grade among all wide receivers with at least 80 targets. So you know what these veterans give you, like Marvin Jones Jr. He's done with, like, don't take shots on these old veterans. Yeah, give me some of these first, second round draft capital players over like a Terrace Marshall. Okay. The Terrace Marshall train is dead. Like over Van Jefferson. I'm sorry. Like I'm not sorry. Like, this is good advice. You should be taking these first and second round draft capital wide receivers over wide receivers 50s and 60s, 70s. All right. So there you go. There's my little rant for the day. Okay. Nevertheless, wow. There's no way that CJ Stroud falls this far. Like, what the heck is going on with this mock draft? I don't understand the settings. No, I don't want to lose that. Okay. We'll have to do another draft here sometime, but there's 0% chance that CJ Stroud falls in the 4th round in this mock draft. I have no idea what kind of settings this is, but this is ridiculous. Okay. We're going to go with Zach Charbonnet, who's mostly beginning day 2 draft capital. I can't believe he is just hanging out at pick 104. That's wild to me. Okay. Yeah, you're welcome, Jose. And for those who are new and like the content, make sure you hit that red subscribe button down at the bottom of the video. It really, really helps for sure. Okay. So we see Cedric Tillman go off in the beginning of the 4th round. Jake Bobo. Wow. I don't even know who that is. That is a new name for me. Bobo. Yeah, maybe I need to change the target threshold here. Jake Bobo. Okay. Wide receiver out of UCLA, getting early 4th round draft capital, an 83.7 PFF receiving grade, 54 receptions, 89 yards, 7 touchdowns, and a 2.13 yards per route run. That's pretty bad. So yeah, maybe not the best mock draft. Sorry, guys. Usually these are pretty good on the ones I do on my phone, but I would recommend going through these mock drafts over and over again so you can get a feel for where are these players going. Some of these players, this is the lowest I've seen them, and I feel kind of embarrassed that this is the first mock draft Monday that I'll be doing. But Ronnie Bell was an interesting player for Michigan. He was consistently in the top 30 of a lot of the metrics I was looking at: yards per route run, yards after contact, PFF receiving grade. Ronnie Bell was very, very interesting. Okay, so grading my draft, I don't care how they grade the draft. Wow, I got lots of A pluses. Look at that. Yeah, I don't even know. Okay, but once again, we'll look at the full result in my first round of mock draft. That's pretty wild. Yeah, seeing Jahmyr Gibbs make it there, Quentin Johnson there. Usually Quentin Johnson is somewhere between 12 and 20. So that was surprising. Josh Downs was the highest that I had seen him here. And then looking at the full results, I mean, I spent a lot of time talking the 1st and 2nd rounds, but let's look at just a couple other players in the 3rd and 4th rounds that may have slipped past. Deuce Vaughn gets day 2 draft capital out of Kansas State, running back. Let's see. Kenny McIntosh out of Georgia also gets late day 2 draft capital. Yeah, let's see. CJ Stroud finally goes to Washington. There's no way that happened. Sorry, Matthew Berry. CJ Stroud to Washington. God help us. I'm going to have to do another one next Monday. But yeah, this is a lot of fun. I appreciate all of you jumping in with me. Hendon Hooker. I'm actually, as a player evaluator, there's a lot of things that I liked about Hendon Hooker over Will Levis as a quarterback prospect. So I know that Hooker's coming off the ACL tear, and that's why he's probably going to get a tough shake here, but might be a tremendous value. He has the PFF rushing grade of Anthony Richardson, but also has the passing pedigree that was really, really interesting to me. So maybe talk me out of Hendon Hooker. I think I'm going to take a lot of later super flex picks on Hendon Hooker as an investment pick there in Dynasty. Darius Davis gets 4th round draft capital. And my boy Dwayne McBride does not make this list, but nevertheless, I'm very, very happy to have done this with you, this mock draft with y'all. Hopefully we better get a better one next Monday. As I said, this is a lot of fun for me. And make sure that you are hitting that red subscribe button if you are new. I really appreciate all of you jumping in. And I'll be drafting as a few different teams. And once again, I am not concerned about landing spot. We can worry about landing spot after combine, after we get more information. But ultimately, these mock drafts and mock draft simulators should be used as a tool to help us better understand projected draft capital and how that may impact the fantasy choices we make at this point. You don't want to be missing out on the Garrett Wilsons and Chris Olaves of the world just because you don't know what they are. Imagine drafting 0% Olave and 0% Garrett Wilson. I can't. And also, King Capital won the $1 million with Kenneth Walker, Damian Pierce, Garrett Wilson, and I think and there was another rookie that he drafted He won the regular season Best Ball Mania 3 tournament with just a bunch of mid-pack round rookies. So that's another strategy that you should consider taking, is where are these players going and not being afraid to get them in your shares at the appropriate price. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, good luck in the best ball streets.
I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bell, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bell, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still.
This is quarterback Will Levis, and you're listening to the Best Bell Fantasy Podcast.